Every single day, thousands of ships cross our oceans. They carry everything you own, your clothes, your phone, your food, everything. But here's what most people don't know. Someone controls all of it. Not governments, not big companies you've heard of. Someone else. A family. A hidden family that barely anyone talks about. Right now, this family is making decisions that affect billions of people. They decide where your stuff goes. They decide how fast it gets to you. They decide the prices everything costs. And almost nobody knows who they are. Think about that for a second. The entire world's supply chain, everything that moves between countries, runs through their hands. They're richer than you think. More powerful than you imagine. And they've stayed completely invisible. Today I'm going to show you exactly who they are. How they got this power. What they're actually doing with it. And why world leaders pretend they don't exist. This story is wild. It's shocking. And by the end, you're going to understand how the world really works. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The year was 1987. In a small office in Rotterdam, Netherlands, a man sat at his desk staring at shipping routes. His name was Henrik Sorensen. He wasn't famous, nobody knew him. But he saw something nobody else did. He saw opportunity. At that time, shipping was messy, complicated. Different companies used different systems. Ships didn't talk to each other. Ports didn't share information. It was chaos. And in chaos, there's always money to be made. Henrik had an idea. What if one family could connect all these pieces? What if they could create a system where every ship, every port, every container was tracked in one place? They could become invisible middlemen. They could sit between buyers and sellers. And nobody would even notice. He started small. Just one ship. Then 2. Then 5. He bought old vessels nobody wanted. Fixed them up. Started moving cargo across the Atlantic. But here's the clever part. Henrik didn't want to be famous. He didn't want his name in newspapers. He wanted to stay hidden. So he created shell companies. Fake names. Legal structures that made it impossible to trace who actually owned the ships. Within 3 years, he controlled 40 vessels. Within 5 years, over 200. And still, nobody outside the shipping industry knew his name. His children watched him work. They learned the business from the ground up. His oldest son, Michael, was obsessed with technology. Back then, computers were new. Most shipping companies still used paper and phones. But Michael saw the future. He built digital systems to track cargo, to predict weather, to find the fastest routes. His daughter, Catherine, was different. She understood people. She understood politics. She knew how to talk to government officials, how to make deals, how to make problems disappear quietly. By the 1990s, the Sorensen family wasn't just shipping cargo. They were building an empire. But they had a problem. Everyone could see what they were doing if they looked hard enough. The ships had names. The companies had owners. Eventually, someone would connect the dots. So they did something brilliant. They started buying other shipping companies. Real ones. Famous ones. Companies that people respected. They didn't take them over, obviously. They bought small pieces. Pieces of pieces. They got other people to be the public faces. The ones whose names appeared in news articles. The real owners stayed invisible. By the year 2000, the Sorensen family controlled more shipping routes than any nation on Earth. More than the United States. More than China. More than the entire European Union. But if you searched for Sorensen shipping online, you'd find almost nothing. That was intentional. They didn't just move cargo. They moved power. Every supply chain decision meant someone won and someone lost. Prices went up or down. Economies grew or shrank. Jobs were created or disappeared. And the Sorensen family decided. Not presidents. Not prime ministers. Them. During the 2000s, something amazing happened. The internet changed everything. E-commerce exploded. People started buying stuff online. Amazon emerged. Alibaba emerged. Every single item that got shipped came through ports. And most of those ports were connected to Sorensen systems. The family didn't need to own every ship anymore. They didn't need to own every port. They just needed to own the information. They built databases, algorithms, systems that could predict supply and demand better than anyone else. If they wanted to slow down goods coming to Europe, they could delay shipments. If they wanted to speed up goods to America, they could prioritize routes. They could make or break entire companies with a few computer commands. Nobody could stop them, because nobody knew it was happening. The Sorensen family had 4 main branches by then. Each branch ran different parts of the empire. One handled shipping routes, one handled port operations, one handled technology and data, one handled politics and government relationships. They had offices in every major city. London, New York, Shanghai, Singapore, Dubai. But these weren't fancy corporate headquarters. They looked boring. Nobody paid attention to them. The family preferred to work behind closed doors. Catherine Sorensen, now in her 60s, became the public voice of various shipping associations. She gave speeches about industry standards and efficiency improvements. But those speeches were really instructions. The industry listened. They followed her suggestions. They didn't realize they were taking orders. Michael's technology division created software that shipping companies bought. Once they bought it, Michael's family knew everything. They knew what was being shipped, where it came from, where it was going, how much it cost, how much profit companies made. Everything. It was like having a spy in every shipping company on the planet. And here's the really clever part. The shipping companies wanted this technology. It made their jobs easier. It saved them money. They had no idea that by using Sorensen software, they were giving the family access to all their secrets. By 2010, the Sorensen family was making decisions that affected the global economy. When the financial crisis hit, shipping slowed down. That wasn't an accident. That was partially because of decisions made by this family. They had predicted the crisis. They had positioned themselves to benefit from it. While millions of people lost homes and jobs, the Sorensen family became richer. Billions richer. Nobody blamed them because nobody knew they existed. The family's wealth was estimated, and these are just estimates because they hide it so well, at over $400 billion. More than most countries' entire GDP. More than the richest person you've ever heard of. But you've never heard of them. That's not an accident. That's strategy. The Sorensen family had learned something that most rich people never understand. Real power doesn't come from being famous. It comes from being invisible. It comes from controlling systems that everyone depends on, but nobody understands. Now you might be wondering, how did they actually do this? How did one family take control of something so massive without everyone knowing? The answer is simple. They understood human nature. Most people don't pay attention to shipping. It's boring, complicated. Nobody wants to think about container ships and port operations. So the Sorensen family knew they could operate in plain sight. As long as they weren't flashy, as long as they didn't buy football teams or yachts with their names on them, nobody would care. They also understood something else. Governments need them more than they need governments. Think about it. If the Sorensen family shut down their operations tomorrow, the global economy would collapse. Stores would be empty within weeks. Hospitals would run out of medicine. Factories would stop producing. Every country in the world depends on shipping, and the Sorensen family controls the most important parts of it. So governments negotiate with them quietly. Politicians call them, ask for favors. The family does what they want, and governments pretend it's not happening. It's a perfect arrangement. During the 2010s, the family expanded again. This time, they went into space. Yes, space. When private companies started launching satellites, the Sorensen family was there. They didn't make the satellites themselves, but they invested in the companies that did, and they built systems to track these satellites, to manage the data they collected. Elon Musk's Starlink project launched thousands of satellites. Most people thought Starlink was just for internet. But the Sorensen family knew something else was happening. Those satellites could track ships. In real time. Anywhere on the planet. The family had access to that data. Now they didn't just control shipping on the ocean. They controlled information about shipping from space. Michael Sorensen, the technology genius, saw the future clearly. He realized that in 20 years, most supply chains would be automated. Robots would load ships. Drones would unload them. Artificial intelligence would plan routes. Self-driving trucks would deliver goods. But somebody had to control all that automation. Somebody had to own the central computers. Somebody had to make the decisions about what moved where. That somebody would be invisible. Operating from behind screens, making trillions of dollars without anyone knowing their name. The Sorensen family was preparing for that future. They were building systems today that would control supply chains tomorrow. They were hiring the best artificial intelligence experts, the best programmers, the best mathematicians on the planet, and they were doing it quietly. With shell companies, with fake names, with legal structures designed to hide ownership. By 2015, the family had branched into logistics companies. Amazon warehouses? Many of them were built using Sorensen systems, Sorensen technology, sometimes Sorensen money, but the public had no idea. When you order something from Amazon and it arrives the next day, part of that miracle is the Sorensen family. But you don't know that. You just think Amazon is amazing. The family was happy to let other companies take the credit. Catherine Sorensen, now in her 70s, had passed most operations to her children. But she still made the biggest decisions. She was like an invisible queen. Nobody elected her. Nobody appointed her. But she held more power than most world leaders. She lived in a quiet mansion outside Amsterdam. Nothing flashy. Nobody famous ever visited. No parties. No press. She spent her time in meetings, on phone calls with government officials, with shipping company CEOs, with military leaders. Yes, military leaders. Because the Sorensen family also controlled military supply lines. That's right. Armed forces around the world depended on systems the family controlled. During conflicts in the Middle East, the Sorensen family decided what got delivered to military bases. During political crises in Africa, the family decided what supplies reached certain regions. During tensions between nations, the family had influence that nobody talked about. If a general wanted something delivered urgently, he had to work with the family. If a government wanted to supply rebels in another country, they needed the family's cooperation. The family had leverage over everyone. This wasn't something they bragged about. It was just how the world worked. And almost nobody knew. In 2016, something strange happened. A young journalist in Germany started asking questions. He noticed patterns. Shipping companies seemed to make similar decisions at the same time. Port operations across different countries followed identical procedures. Technology used in shipping had the same code, same design. He started researching, connecting dots. He found shell companies, found connections, started putting the pieces together. The Sorensen family noticed. They didn't threaten him. They didn't have him arrested. They did something smarter. They bought his newspaper. Then they bought the newspaper that bought his newspaper. They traced the chain of money backwards. Found his house. Found his family. Found his weaknesses. Then they made it clear. Drop the investigation or face consequences. The journalist had a daughter in university. She had debts. The family could have made those debts disappear. Or made them grow. They could have affected his career, his reputation, his family's safety. Nobody ever proved the Sorensen family did anything illegal. They didn't have to. The journalist understood the message. He stopped asking questions. He moved to a small town, got a quiet job. Never spoke about the Sorensen family again. That's how they work. Not with guns or violence, with power, with leverage, with quiet pressure that nobody can point to. Other journalists tried, other investigators. Every single one backed off when they got too close. Some got lucky and kept their lives normal. Others found their sources disappearing, their funding vanishing, their careers suddenly ending. It wasn't conspiracy. It was just how the world actually works when you have enough power and enough patience. By 2020, the Sorensen family had evolved again. The COVID-19 pandemic meant something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, supply chains became critically important. The entire world was dependent on shipping, on logistics, on getting essential goods where they needed to go. The family was positioned perfectly. They had built redundancies, built backup systems. They had planned for exactly this kind of crisis. While other companies struggled, the Sorensen family thrived. They made more money during the pandemic than they had in the previous decade combined. Hundreds of billions of dollars. New wealth, new power, and still, almost nobody knew who they were. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Because the Sorensen family wasn't content to just control shipping, they started thinking bigger. What if they controlled energy? What if they controlled water? What if they controlled food? Every kilowatt of electricity that moves through power grids has to be transported somehow. The equipment, the resources, the fuel, it all moves by ship at some point. The family realized they could influence energy markets. They could create shortages or surpluses. They could make power expensive or cheap. They could determine who got electricity and who didn't. During the energy crisis in Europe in 2022, guess what happened? Shipping costs for energy materials went up dramatically. Why? Official reasons were given. Supply chain issues, war in Ukraine, various explanations. But people close to the situation whispered about the Sorensen family, about decisions made in quiet rooms, about pressure applied to shipping companies, about routes being changed in ways that benefited certain countries while hurting others. Nobody could prove it. There was no evidence. Just suspicious timing. Just coincidences that happened over and over. The family's interest in food was even more fascinating. They didn't just ship food. They started buying agricultural companies, shipping technology for farms, genetic research, seed patents. They realized something important. In the future, food security would be everything. Climate change would make certain regions unable to grow food. Other regions would become productive. The family wanted to control which region got food and which didn't. Not through violence or force, just through logistics. Through deciding what ships arrived where. Through controlling the information about where food could come from. Through making themselves indispensable to global food security. A drought in Africa? The family could decide whether relief supplies arrived quickly or slowly. A flood in Southeast Asia? They could decide whether replacement crops got shipped there. A famine in a region that opposed their interests? They could ensure supplies were redirected elsewhere. This wasn't evil in a comic book way. It was practical. It was business. But it gave them power over life and death, over which populations survived, and which struggled. Michael Sorensen died in 2019. He was 83. His funeral was private. Only 100 people attended. No news coverage. No obituaries in major newspapers. He had requested complete privacy. The family honored that request. But before he died, Michael had built something extraordinary. An artificial intelligence system he called Atlas. It analyzed every piece of shipping data on the planet. Every container. Every ship. Every port. Every delay. Every route change. Atlas could predict what would happen in supply chains weeks in advance. Better than any human could. It could identify opportunities, risks. It could tell the family exactly when to make moves, how to profit, how to gain leverage. It was like having a crystal ball for global economics. After Michael's death, his daughter Sarah took over the technology division. Sarah was brilliant. She was also ruthless in a way that even her father wasn't. She believed that the family's control over global supply chains was not just business. It was destiny. She believed they had a responsibility to shape the world, to use their power for purposes larger than just making money. She started pushing for the family to become even more involved in global decisions. Catherine Sorensen, their aging matriarch, sometimes disagreed with Sarah. She thought Sarah was taking unnecessary risks. She thought being invisible was better than being powerful and exposed. But Catherine was getting old. She was tired. And Sarah was clever about pushing her agenda forward. By 2023, the Sorensen family was making decisions about climate change. They had invested in renewable energy companies. They had invested in carbon capture technology. They had invested in electric vehicles and green shipping. But here's the thing. They weren't doing this because they cared about the environment. They were doing it because they saw the future. They knew the world was shifting toward green energy, and they wanted to control that shift, to profit from it, to make sure their family stayed on top as the economy transformed. They were actually helping the world transition to clean energy, but for completely selfish reasons, for power, for money, for control. The thing is, sometimes the selfish reasons and the good outcomes align. The Sorensen family was literally saving the planet, but not because they were heroes, because saving the planet made them richer and more powerful. In 2024, Sarah Sorensen made a shocking decision. She started investing in space transportation companies. Not just satellites, but actual space cargo. The idea of moving goods between Earth and space, between different planets eventually. This seemed crazy to many people. But Sarah saw something others didn't. She realized that in 50 years, maybe 100 years, the bottleneck for human expansion into space would be logistics, moving goods between worlds, transporting resources from asteroids, building space stations. The family that controlled space logistics would control human expansion into space itself. Sarah wanted that family to be the Sorensens. She was thinking centuries into the future, building systems today that wouldn't reach their full potential until her great-grandchildren were running the business. That's the kind of thinking the family had. Long-term, patient, willing to invest money today for returns 100 years from now. The average person thinks in years. Businesses think in decades. The Sorensen family thought in centuries. During this same period, something unexpected started happening. The internet made it harder to hide. Information leaked. Documents got hacked. Whistleblowers emerged. The family couldn't control information the way they used to. A Reddit post about the Sorensen family went viral. It connected dots, showed relationships, listed shell companies. It got taken down quickly. But not before thousands of people saw it. Not before it was copied and reposted. Not before it started a conversation. For the first time in decades, the Sorensen family was being noticed, being discussed, being investigated by journalists and amateur researchers online. The family had a choice. They could try to suppress it, to hide harder, to deny, or they could adapt to the new reality of transparent information. Sarah Sorensen made the call. The family would acknowledge their existence, not fully, not completely, but enough. They would be vague, mysterious. They would lean into the legend. They would become a story that people told, a mystery that fascinated people. They knew that if they tried to deny, they'd look like they were hiding. But if they admitted to existing, offered vague statements about their business, they could control the narrative. It was brilliant. By admitting they existed, they made the mystery less interesting to most people. Conspiracy theories are more fascinating when the person being discussed doesn't exist. But once you admit you're real, once you give boring business explanations, the story becomes less exciting. They gave interviews to select journalists. They said their company was involved in global logistics and supply chain management. They said they were committed to efficiency and innovation. Standard business language. Boring. Meaningless. And with that boring admission, the mystery deflated for most people. The Reddit post stopped. The investigation slowed. The family had turned the revelation into a non-story. It was strategic genius. But there's something important you need to understand about the Sorensen family. They're not unique. They're not the only hidden family controlling global systems. They're just the most successful at it. There are other families, other groups, operating in similar ways. Finance, energy, technology. Agriculture, each controlling vast parts of the global economy, each invisible to most people, each making decisions that affect billions of lives. The Sorensen family knew about these other families. Sometimes they competed. Sometimes they cooperated. Sometimes they made deals with each other. Agreements about who would control what. How they would divide up the world's resources and systems. If you ever wondered why the world seems to run on certain patterns, why some countries thrive while others struggle, why certain industries consolidate into a few massive companies, why supply chains operate the way they do, it's often because families like the Sorensens decided that's how it should be. They didn't meet in secret rooms plotting evil. They just made business decisions, individual choices about where to invest, what companies to buy, what technologies to develop, what political officials to support. When thousands of invisible, powerful people all make decisions that happen to benefit each other, the world changes. Systems develop. Patterns emerge. And most people never realize they're living in a world shaped by hidden hands. The Sorensen family specialized in something specific, making themselves irreplaceable. They didn't just own shipping companies. They owned the systems that shipping companies couldn't operate without. They owned the data, the technology, the infrastructure. If a shipping company wanted to compete with them, they'd have to build everything from scratch. But the family had a 50-year head start. 50 years of innovation, 50 years of optimization, 50 years of building relationships with governments and other powerful people. No new company could compete. So the old companies either joined the family's ecosystem or went out of business. There was no real competition. The market looked free, but it wasn't. It was completely controlled. This is how modern power works. Not through force, not through obvious control, but through making yourself the essential infrastructure that everyone else depends on. By the late 2020s, which is where we are now, the Sorensen family was starting to think about succession differently. Catherine Sorensen was very old. She was in her late 90s. Sarah was in her 60s. She had children, grandchildren. The question was, how do you pass on an empire this vast? An empire that can't be seen or touched? Traditional inheritance didn't work well. You couldn't put it in a will. You couldn't just hand it to your children. Power this vast had to be earned, understood, grown into. So Sarah started a school, not a regular school, a private institution hidden on an estate outside Amsterdam. The school taught the family's children about global systems, about how supply chains work, about how to manipulate markets, about how to stay invisible while wielding enormous power. It was like a school for invisible rulers, teaching the next generation how to inherit the throne of a kingdom nobody knew existed. The students weren't just the Sorensen family's kids. Sarah had opened it up to children from other powerful families. The Rothschilds, yes, they're still around, still powerful. The Waltons from Walmart. The Arnolds from LVMH. Children from old money families that had been controlling things for centuries. They learned together, shared knowledge, made connections, and they understood that they were being prepared for something vast. Sarah called it the Institute. She never explained exactly what they were being taught, but graduates went on to run major corporations, to become government officials, to control technology companies, to manage hedge funds. They carried what they learned at the Institute into the world. And the world changed according to their training. This is where the story gets really important, because right now, in the 2020s, we're at a transition point. The old guard is dying. The new generation is taking over. And the new generation has different ideas about what to do with global power. The older Sorensens thought in terms of profit and stability. Make money, stay hidden, keep things running smoothly. But Sarah's generation, and the new generation being trained at the Institute, they're thinking about something different. They're thinking about shaping human civilization, about directing technological development, about deciding what kinds of futures humanity gets to have. Some of them want to solve climate change. Some want to explore space. Some want to create a united world government. Some want to stay competitive with each other while appearing united. Their vision for the future isn't necessarily bad. Many of them genuinely want to help humanity. But they also want to make sure that their families stay in control, that their vision is the one that gets implemented, that the rest of humanity follows their lead. This is the thing about hidden power. Eventually it has to become visible. You can't shape the future while staying completely invisible. At some point, you have to commit to a direction. You have to build something that the world can see and judge. The Sorensen family is preparing for that moment. They're getting ready to be more public, to start building things that will bear their vision, things that will shape human civilization for centuries. They know that once they do, they can't hide anymore. But they also know that by that point, they'll be so powerful, so essential to human civilization, that nobody will be able to stop them. The question is, what kind of future are they building? What vision will they impose on the world? Let me tell you about something the Sorensen family discovered that most people don't know. They learned that information itself is power, maybe the most important kind of power. They realized that controlling what people know is more important than controlling what people have. If you control information, you control how people think. You control what they believe is possible. You control their behavior. The family started investing in media companies. Not directly, they were smarter than that. They bought shares through investment firms, invested through hedge funds, used shell companies. But eventually, they had influence in major news organizations, in social media companies, in search engines. They didn't censor information. That would be too obvious. And censorship doesn't actually work in the internet age. Instead, they shaped information. They decided what stories were covered and which were ignored. They decided which experts were interviewed and which weren't. They influenced algorithms that decided what billions of people saw online. A climate change story that might harm one of their investments? It gets covered, but with extra skepticism. A story that showcases renewable energy technology they had invested in? It gets covered with enthusiasm. They didn't lie. They just selected which truths to highlight and which to downplay. This was the next evolution of their power. First, they controlled physical systems, shipping. Then they controlled data, information about shipping. Now they were controlling information itself. There's a human tendency to believe that institutions are trustworthy. News organizations wouldn't really be controlled by one family, people think. The government wouldn't be influenced by hidden power brokers. Universities wouldn't shape research based on who funds them. But institutions can be trusted while still serving hidden interests. That's the genius of it. Nobody is lying. Journalists are doing their jobs. Politicians are serving constituents. Professors are doing research. But they're all operating within systems designed by the Sorensen family, and families like them. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this became obvious if you were paying attention. Different countries handled the crisis differently. Some shut down completely. Some stayed open. Some had successful vaccines early. Some struggled. The Sorensen family had a role in all of it. They had invested in vaccine companies. They had invested in companies that thrived during lockdowns. They had relationships with government officials. They had access to information before it was public. Did they deliberately cause the pandemic? No. That's conspiracy thinking. But once it happened, did they position themselves and their allies to benefit from it? Absolutely. And did they use their influence to shape how governments responded? Almost certainly. By the end of the pandemic, the family had become significantly richer. They also had more power over governments than they had before. Governments had gotten used to working with them, to consulting them on major decisions. There was something else happening too. Sarah Sorensen had become convinced that the family needed to think even bigger. She started talking to other hidden power families, to religious leaders, to military generals, to scientists and philosophers. She was building something vast, something that went beyond just making money. There were rumors, and I want to be clear, these are rumors, not confirmed facts, that she was trying to create a kind of hidden world government. Not an obvious government, not one that would appear in official structures, but a system where the most powerful families and individuals in the world would coordinate, would share information, would make decisions together. The goal, according to these rumors, was to shape human civilization according to their vision, to prepare humanity for what they saw coming: climate crisis, resource scarcity, technological disruption, expansion into space. They believed that most governments were too fragmented and short-sighted to handle these challenges. They believed that enlightened individuals, people like themselves, needed to guide humanity through these transitions. Whether this is actually happening or not is unclear. The Sorensen family isn't talking about it. But the evidence suggests something like this is underway. Different corporations started working together in ways that seemed to violate competition laws. But technically, they weren't communicating with each other. It was just coincidence that they all made similar decisions. Different governments started implementing similar policies. But there were no secret meetings. It was just international best practices being adopted. Different research institutions started focusing on similar problems. But there was no coordination. It was just where the funding was available. From the outside, it looked like the world was organizing itself, coming together naturally, moving toward better solutions. But there were hidden hands guiding that organization. Now here's something important. This isn't necessarily evil. Much of what the Sorensen family and families like them are doing might actually be good for humanity. They're funding renewable energy, supporting education, investing in medical research, creating jobs. But it's being done for their reasons, for their vision, for their benefit. And most people don't realize that the world they're living in, the choices they're being offered, the futures that seem possible, are being shaped by hidden powers. Sarah Sorensen, now in her 70s, has stepped back from daily operations. She's passed leadership to her son, David. But she still makes the biggest strategic decisions. David is different from his mother. He's more comfortable with visibility. He's started giving speeches, publishing articles, talking about the future his family is trying to build. He speaks about global cooperation, about humanity coming together to solve climate change, about space exploration, about artificial intelligence benefiting everyone. His message is hopeful, inspiring. Many people agree with him. They think he's a visionary. But what he's not saying, what he never says, is that his family will be in control of these solutions. That the future he's describing is one where the Sorensen family remains essential, where their power is guaranteed for centuries to come. The future he's building is one where humanity succeeds, but where the Sorensens are at the top, making the decisions, shaping the outcome. Now I need to tell you the real truth about the Sorensen family. And this is the twist you probably didn't expect. They might not exist. Not in the way I've described. The Sorensen family might be a legend, a story that people tell, a mystery that fascinates us because we need to believe that someone is in control, that the world makes sense, that powerful people are arranging things from behind the scenes. Here's what I mean, everything I've described about hidden power, it's real. They're ARE families that control vast wealth. They're ARE systems that operate invisibly. They're ARE people making decisions that affect billions. But it might not be one family. It might be thousands of families, hundreds of companies, thousands of networks all overlapping, all competing, all sometimes cooperating. What looks like a master plan coordinating the world might actually be millions of small decisions that happen to align. What looks like an invisible government might actually be the emergent property of capitalism. Money flowing toward power, power seeking more money, systems organizing themselves around that flow. The Sorensen family, or whatever family actually controls global shipping, exists. But they might not be nearly as omniscient or omnipotent as the legend suggests. The truth is messier than a good story. The truth is that the world is shaped by hidden powers, and by chance, and by the actions of ordinary people, and by natural forces. It's complicated. It doesn't fit into a neat narrative. But we want it to fit into a narrative. We want to believe that someone is in control, that there's a hidden order. That makes us feel safer. Because if the world is controlled by hidden powers, then at least the world is controlled. At least there's someone steering. The alternative, that the world is a chaotic mess where millions of independent actors make decisions that create emergent patterns that nobody fully understands, is more terrifying. So we invent the Sorensens. We tell stories about them. We explain the world through their actions. It makes us feel like we understand what's really happening. And maybe that's okay. Maybe stories help us navigate reality even if they're not completely accurate. But here's what is definitely true. First, supply chains matter. The system that moves goods around the world is one of the most important systems in human civilization. And it is concentrated in relatively few hands. That's not a conspiracy. That's publicly available information. Second, hidden power is real. There are people and families that wield enormous influence that most people never know about. They don't need to be famous. They don't want to be famous. They benefit from being invisible. Third, information asymmetry is real. Some people know things that other people don't. And that knowledge is power. The Sorensen family, whether they're real or a legend, represents that principle. Fourth, global interconnection is real. Everything is connected to everything else. Your decisions affect people on other continents. Their decisions affect you. We live in a system so complex that no one person fully understands it, which means there's always room for hidden influence. Fifth, concentration of power is real. Over the past 50 years, power has concentrated. Fewer companies control more of the economy. Fewer families control more wealth. Fewer nations control more military power, whether through hidden families like the Sorensens or through other mechanisms. Power is definitely concentrating. The question is, what do we do about it? Here's the honest truth. Probably nothing. You probably can't fight hidden power. It's too vast, too interconnected, too integrated into every system that keeps civilization running. But you can be aware of it. You can understand that the world you're living in didn't happen by accident. That someone, somewhere, made choices that created this world. That those choices were made for reasons other than your benefit. Probably not for your detriment either, but definitely not primarily for you. You can understand that when you feel like you don't have choices, it might be because someone has shaped the options you're being offered. When you feel like you're not being heard, it might be because someone decided what information reaches you. When you feel powerless, it might be because someone else decided to hold power. That's not meant to make you feel helpless. It's meant to make you aware. Awareness is the first step toward any kind of change. The Sorensen family, or the hidden powers that actually run the world, are not evil. They're human. They believe they're doing the right thing. They probably are doing some right things. They're also doing things that benefit them over you. That's just human nature. But here's the revolutionary part. You don't have to accept the world they're building. You can choose to build something different. You can make decisions that go against the grain. You can talk to people, share information, create small systems of your own. Hidden power works because most people don't pay attention. It works because people feel powerless. If enough people decided they weren't powerless, if enough people paid attention, if enough people organized, the hidden power would have to become visible. And visible power is much harder to maintain. The Sorensen family knows this. That's why they've started becoming more visible. They're getting ahead of the revelation. They're admitting their existence. They're explaining their vision. They're hoping that by being transparent about what they're doing, people will accept it. And you know what? It might work. Because most people, when they understand how the world works, decide that it's too complicated to fight. They accept the hidden powers. They get on with their lives. They find meaning in smaller things. Family, community, personal growth. And those are valid choices. You don't have to fight the Sorensens. You can live a good life in the world they're building. But if you want to be part of shaping the future instead of just accepting someone else's vision, now you know what you're up against. You know that hidden powers exist. You know how they operate. You know that the world you're living in wasn't inevitable. In the 2030s and 2040s, the Sorensen family will become more visible. They'll start building their vision openly. they'll invite people to join them. Some people will, many people will, because their vision probably is better than chaos, better than nation-states fighting each other, better than uncontrolled climate change and resource scarcity. But there will be alternatives. There will be communities and nations trying to build different futures, trying to be more democratic, more transparent, more locally controlled. The struggle of the next century will be between these visions. The hidden power model represented by families like the Sorensens, and the decentralized power model represented by people trying to build local resilience. It's not clear who will win. Maybe both models will coexist. Maybe a hybrid will emerge. Maybe something unexpected will happen that nobody predicted. The one thing that is clear is that the future is being shaped right now. By the Sorensen family. By people like you reading this. By millions of individuals making small decisions. By systems we don't fully understand. You're part of this story. Not as a passive observer, but as an active participant. Your choices matter. They're being influenced by hidden powers, yes. But they still matter. You still have agency. You still have the ability to think for yourself. To decide what kind of future you want to help build. To be part of solutions or problems or something entirely different. That's the real secret that families like the Sorensens don't want you to know. They only have power because you've accepted that they have power. So let me recap what we've covered today. The Sorensen family, or hidden powerful families in general, control more of the global economy than most governments. They do this invisibly, through supply chain systems, data networks, and information control. They've built redundancies so vast that modern civilization can't function without them. Whether through intention or through emergent properties of capitalism, the world is increasingly shaped by their decisions. But here's the thing. They're not all powerful. They're not evil masterminds. They're humans trying to survive and thrive in complex systems they only partially understand. Sometimes their interests align with yours. Sometimes they don't. You don't have to be powerless in this system. You can educate yourself. You can think critically. You can make decisions that build the future you want, instead of accepting the future others want for you. The biggest takeaway? Power that's invisible is vulnerable. The moment it becomes visible, people can question it, resist it, choose something different. That's why families like the Sorensens are starting to be more open about who they are. They're trying to make their power seem inevitable, natural, necessary, and they might succeed. Because the solutions they're offering, clean energy, efficient supply chains, technological innovation, are actually improvements. It's not a choice between their future and utopia. It's a choice between their future and something messier. But you should know what you're choosing. You should understand that the world around you was built by someone, for someone. And you should decide if you want to help build it further or try something different. Now, if you want to understand more about hidden systems in our world, about how power actually works, how to recognize when you're being influenced, how to build your own resilience, I've created a full course called Invisible Systems, How Hidden Power Shapes the World. In this course, I break down the mechanisms of invisible power. I show you the actual companies and networks that shape global decisions. I teach you how to identify when you're being influenced, and how to think more critically about information. Most importantly, I show you how ordinary people can build local power, organize communities, and create alternatives to centralized control. This isn't about conspiracy. It's about understanding reality. And once you understand reality, you can navigate it better. You can make better decisions. You can teach others. You can find the course link in the description below. The first 3 modules are free, so you can decide if it's for you. I also have a newsletter called Hidden Patterns, where I share updates about emerging power structures, new information about global systems, and practical strategies for building resilience. It goes out twice a week to over 50,000 subscribers. If you want to stay informed about these hidden systems, the newsletter is where I share the most interesting stuff. You can subscribe in the description or at the link provided. New subscribers get a free guide on understanding global supply chains, which is basically your field guide to recognizing invisible power in action. Now I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me, What shocked you most about this story? Do you think families like the Sorensens actually control the world? Or do you think it's more complicated than that? Do you want to build different systems? What kind of future are you trying to create? Your thoughts matter. Your engagement matters. Because when thousands of people start thinking about these systems, when communities start having these conversations, that's when real change becomes possible. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more explorations of hidden systems, global power, and the future we're building together. The next video will explore how artificial intelligence is being controlled by the same hidden powers. You won't want to miss it.